how does the central bank fail? Is it just the fact that they're sort of caught between, we look at the moment, there's inflation, but at the same time, the economy's crashing. So they're trying to balance that. And is it just that they don't do the right thing and then inflation continues to go up and then they lose control?
There is no right thing. There's nothing right that they can do. They can try to balance a system of theft for as long as possible, but eventually it collapses. Once you start printing money substitutes over your gold supply, then the people that receive that money grow and grow, and then they become dependent, and then you have to give them more and more, and then the things that they grow become dependent, and then you can't let anything fall, and the pyramid just keeps getting bigger and bigger until the whole thing collapses. So there is no right thing that they can do. They should not exist. This is not how a society should be run, which is, again, based on theft. A central bank manages theft, which is any Ponzi scheme manages theft. So, it's a basic Ponzi scheme is when you pay off your existing creditors with new creditors. That's what the central bank does. That's what all Ponzi schemes do. And then the federal government feeds off of that by selling bonds to pay off its own bond. Everything is a Ponzi scheme within a Ponzi scheme. And the biggest Ponzi scheme itself is the U.S. dollar. And when the dollar can no longer be exchanged for any amount of gold, that is the definition of hyperinflation, because the money is still gold, because all prices have to go into the past. You can't just invent a fiat money out of nothing. Any fiat we call fiat money has to be indexed to an existing price array. Otherwise, it's meaningless. So everything chains back into the past. The original global money was gold because it was just the best material to do that with, and it still is.
Yeah, really interesting. So, from what you're saying, you see there being a collapse in the current system. Do you sort of think that will happen in a few years? Do you think we're getting to the late stage? What's your opinion on that?
I can't give an exact answer on timing, but what I can say is that I think the ultimate collapse in terms of the dollar going either to absolute zero or returning to a fixed exchange rate with gold, that will happen after the next round of money printing. Meaning 2008 was the let's say the second to last stage, and then all the QEs involved in that, and then you had the COVID printing. Not really the COVID printing, it was the lockdown printing. COVID really had nothing to do with it. It was all the lockdown printing. And then they're now trying to control their pyramid from growing too fast now, so they're raising interest rates and trying to keep the rate a little lower. But that's going to create another collapse, and another pyramid is going to fall. It could be Credit Suisse, it could be any bank in Europe that starts it, because all these banks are stuffed with multi-trillion dollars of derivatives that they have to be bailed out because they will collapse the pyramid if they're allowed to fail. It'll lead to another round of printing, and after that, I think it'll be done within a matter of weeks to months. It's going to happen very fast when it starts. How long did it take for FTX to fall? After a single tweet by Binance, I think it was, that started a bank run, it was like 2 or 3 days, something like that, maybe a week. I don't know if it'll be that fast. I think it'll be weeks to months once it starts, and when it starts, everyone will know. Everyone's going to know. It's going to be obvious.
Yeah, so it'll be like a Lehman of our time, basically.
Yeah. It could be this year.
Yeah, well, if you look at sort of the stock, and I guess there's so many withdrawals, as you said, there's a real concern that the bank is insolvent, basically, that they've made all these bets, they've lost all this money. They don't, why would you keep your money in that bank if you could just go somewhere else and be a bit more secure?
You're talking about Credit Suisse or,
yeah.
or Federal? Okay.
Credit Suisse and maybe Deutsche Bank as well. I know there's concern about them.
Yeah. Credit Suisse, it's the same situation with all banks. All banks were basically forced to bet on lower and lower interest rates. So I think Credit Suisse has like $8.1 trillion of interest rate swaps that it's done with other parties, and who knows who they are. And that's basically an interest rate swap is when you agree to swap floating rate for fixed rate. So when interest rates rise, the value of those swaps go down, and the bank has to pay more and more. because their counterparty is paying a fixed interest rate, and now the bank is paying the floating rate, which is going higher and higher, so they're losing money. But in an environment where the central bank is constantly lowering interest rates, it's always a winning bet until they stop. So they're always caught at the end of these things with a whole bunch of credit derivative paper that is going down in value, and that creates the bust for all the banks, and then they have to start another round of printing again so that they don't collapse. So they'll start another round of printing, and nominally the banks will be fine, but they'll be trading around worthless dollars and worthless euros and worthless yen and all the other stuff that's worthless, and then it doesn't matter what they do because they won't have any real value in them anymore.
Yeah, interesting. And so I guess a lot of people have been talking about this in 2008, 2018, maybe even 2020. Do you think it just culminated in the time, or do you think could they continue the print and there won't be an issue with inflation, or you don't see that possible?
Well, printing is inflation. You're talking about having an issue with rising consumer prices, or basically an issue with consumers realizing what's happening and getting out in front of the central bank theft and dumping the currency. Is that going to happen? Absolutely, it's going to happen. That happens at the end of every cycle. It's an inevitability. It's not something that can be avoided. Once you start taking drugs, you're going to overdose. And either that, or you're going to go through withdrawal, and you're going to radically change your life and stop being a junkie. And look, there's no other way out of it. You can't just continue using higher and higher doses of drugs and then have one of those two outcomes not happen. It's impossible. So I'm not saying that if the collapse is going to happen, it's definitely 100% going to happen. And it's going to happen in our lifetimes. And I think it's going to happen after the next round of printing, and we know that that's coming because that always comes. It always comes.